All right, good morning, everybody. It is that time. We're ready to get started. My name is Jennifer Morse. I'm with MadCap Software, and I want to thank all of you for joining today. As always, we're so happy to have you. So today's session is all about the value and importance of data and analytics and how it can help continuously improve your content management strategy. And why is this important? Well, if you're a team of one or a team of many, you likely have put time and effort into developing a comprehensive documentation portal or a learning portal or a knowledge center, whatever it is you're calling it. And we need to know, is this information useful? Are users, are learners finding what they're looking for? And by which means are they accessing that content? How do you know if your content addresses the real crux of what they're looking for? So getting user feedback from maybe comments or utilizing feedback widgets to collect that information, maybe direct emails back to the team, that's great and that's a fantastic idea, but it really only tells one part of the story. You need those output analytics to complete the whole picture. So without knowing how your end users are searching and using this information, it's a bit like driving with your eyes closed. And this data should not be difficult to get. It should be data that can be wrangled quickly and easily. Plus, when we start acting on this data, we start having a positive impact on the bottom line, and things like internal ticket deflection, which can be quite costly for an organization. We know that when end users can find what they need quickly, they're happier with the product or the service or their role within an organization. So I am so excited to welcome our guest today, Angela Ives, owner of Ives Consulting, who's going to walk us through her use of output analytics and how she's put that to work with her clients and her projects, and show us how easy it is to use MadCap Central's output analytics feature to assess user behavior, because analyzing that published content regularly is going to give you the insight to make informed decisions about how to tailor your content and your portal to fit users' needs. So welcome, Angela. So happy to have you join us today. It's always fun to talk to you. Before I turn it over to you, though, I just want to remind everybody that I have two quick items of business, as always, to review before we jump in. This is going to be recorded, so if you have to leave early, not to worry. We're going to send a link to this recording as soon as we're done. Also, I would encourage all of you to use that question panel in the GoToWebinar console to ask questions as we're kind of going through. We're going to do our best to get to everything at the end. So please use that as a place to drop in any questions so that we can get to them at the end of the presentation. So again, thanks, Angela, for joining us today. I'm so happy to have you. I know you have a lot to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about MadCap Central Analytics and how you can use it as a bridge from Neophyte to Ninja. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the importance of user feedback, look at some important questions that we should be asking ourselves as documentarians, look at how to get user feedback, and some possible next steps that we should take. So user feedback it's quite critical. You know, we all want to get to know our users better. And, you know, we spend so much time developing the documentation. We really want to provide these four things to our users. So we want to give them what they need when they need it. We want to give them clear and relevant, accessible content. We want to help them find content quickly. And we want to address frequent, relevant questions. And we can do that in several ways. So first of all, let's look at some questions that we should ask ourselves as documentarians. So the first question is, how do I know that the documentation portal is actually being used? I've spent all this time, you know, over several months, could be even over a year or so. And, you know, all this effort I put in, are people actually using the documentation site? The second question we want to ask ourselves is, you know, are users finding the content that they need? They're not struggling, they're finding it fairly quickly. The third question we want to ask ourselves is, how do I know if we're missing useful content? You know, you think you've spent all this time on the documentation, you think you've got everything covered, but maybe there are some missing components that are quite important for the users. So there are two main ways in which you can get user feedback. The first way is the proactive approach, and the second way is the reactive approach. So I'll cover the proactive approach first. So we may think, there are lots of ways to do this. You've got feedback widgets you can use. You can personally reach out to customers. You can use communication platforms, and you can even use in-app guides. And some examples of popular ones are WalkMe, WhatFix, Pendo, but there's several out there. So let's look at the feedback widget. It engages the user, which is great. That's what we want. We want them to give us their feedback. You can custom design these in Flare, MadCap Flare, or you can purchase them. Now, they do range in price from quite inexpensive to quite expensive. And so you want to take into consideration which feedback widgets or which feedback widgets that you're going to incorporate into your documentation. They all offer different features, so make sure you do your homework before you purchase anything like this. So here are just some examples on the right side of the screen as to the different types of feedback widgets that you may find in different documentation portals. So it may be as simple as a feedback button. Maybe the button is, on the right side of the screen. Maybe it's a feedback button on the bottom of the screen, or maybe it's something like this simple, provide feedback with a chat symbol or messaging symbol. It can also be something like this one, which is an emoji. Now this is Hotjar. I don't know if any of you have used Hotjar, but this is just another method to display feedback, enticing the user to click it and go further. You can also have the variety that you see on the bottom of the page. So different ways to ask, was this page helpful? Did you find it helpful? You've got yes and no buttons. You can style them to fit the company branding. You can have thumbs up, thumbs down. It's just many different ways you can customize these. Let's look at what frequently happens when users click yes. So these are common responses that documentation portals may have. So when the user clicks yes, in this example in the left, the button goes from being no fill at all to a colored fill, indicating that, yeah, you've selected yes, we recognize you selected yes, and that's it. There's no other information given to the user at that time to kind of let them know that, thanks for providing some feedback or for letting us know how this page is. Another feedback that you could have to the user, just to let them know, thank you for taking the time to give us some feedback, is when they click the yes button, the message like this pops up on the screen. Another method or another response when they click yes would be to have some sort of a free text box. So I like this one the best because it allows the user to let you know what you're doing well or what was really helpful on the page. And maybe things that they'd like to continue seeing you do and improve upon. It's a good way to get that positive feedback from the user. Now, let's look at what may happen when the user clicks no in your feedback widget. So there are several ways you can configure this, and there are a few samples on this page just to give you an idea of how you could do that. So this first example says, sorry about that. Why wasn't this page helpful? And provides you with a few options that you can check to let us know what needs to be fixed. So in this case, it's I couldn't find what I was looking for. Maybe the instructions were confusing or unclear. Maybe the instructions didn't work. And this can help us gather that information and then use our time to focus on fixing those things for the user. Another type of response when you click no is maybe a Google feedback form pops up. And with this type of a form, you can get more information. Let's say you can get them to enter an email address, maybe, for the reason that you'd want to respond to them after the fact and let them know, what, we heard your feedback, we addressed your feedback, and the changes are now on the portal. Another way here, this is Hotjar. So I referenced that a few slides ago where it was that blue emoji that usually appears in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You click the emoji, this slide appears, it asks you, how would you rate the content on this page? And depending on what emoji you select out of these 5 will depend on what kind of questions pop up after that. Another example is this one in the bottom corner. Sorry, you didn't find what you're looking for. How can we make this page useful? And I like this one because it provides a free text box. The user can enter anything. So unlike the first example that I showed you in the left part of the screen, that was, constraining the user to only those 3 options. With a text box, they can write anything that it may not be covered in your 3 checkboxes, for example. And so, and it also allows you to get more robust feedback from the user. And in this case here, with this widget, when you start typing text, that next button is enabled. And the idea is that you would click next, there would be more questions, and you would go on like that. Another very similar type is, again, a free text box. But this is only sort of, there are multiple pages to this, or multiple questions. This question would be it. And again, the user can enter as much information as they want, as little information as they want, and so on. Okay, so another way that you can proactively gather user feedback is personal reach out. And this method is really customer focused. Now, usually it's used for product and not necessarily for documentation because it requires a lot of people power. So say you have thousands of customers. It takes time to reach out to each of those customers individually. You could schedule feedback calls with them. You could email them questions, how is the documentation? How do you find this new feature? How do you find the support for this new feature? You could provide them with surveys, whether these are in-app surveys, and we'll cover in-app shortly, or emails. But again, this requires, kind of some back and forth and extra time on the user's part. So, scheduling calls, they have to take that 30 minutes or hour out of their day to speak with you. Emails, they have to, respond to you, and same with surveys. So another way you can proactively gather user feedback is, through forums on a community website. If you're familiar, MadCap has its own forum. Forums like these, you can have multiple channels. You could have one channel dedicated to documentation, and anybody can go in there. And what's nice about this is that it's public. So anybody that, leaves some sort of comment, others can see this comment. And when you reply to this comment saying, okay, thank you, maybe we're working on this new feature and we're going to be updating the documentation to match, at least everybody can see that response in one place. Another way is through social media channels, like Slack is a popular method. So again, it's a medium in which you can have multiple channels. You can have one dedicated to documentation. But the only issue I see with these communication platforms is that the user is removed from the documentation at the time that they're in these sites. So it's not like the feedback widget where it's right in the documentation on the page where you may be having the problem. Here, it's another tab on your desktop. It's another site you need to visit to put your feedback information in. And so you may not have as much coming through this sort of channel as you would with a feedback widget. So the last method I'm going to cover in terms of proactively reaching out to users are in-app guides. Now these in-app guides, there are many, many of them out there. It's just a few examples that I included on the right-hand side of the screen. With these, you can be both active and passive. So I will cover passive later, but I just want to let you know what these in-app guides can provide for you. They are often used for product adoption and not for documentation. And that may be because they can be quite expensive. And often they count the number of users that are accessing the in-app guide. So if your documentation is not behind a login, say it's free for anybody to access on the web, then you could have hundreds of thousands of hits on that in-app guide, and which is just driving the price higher and higher. If it's your documentation site is behind a portal, then the in-app guide will know if user A has accessed 5 times, and it only counts as one-time access. It's only one user, one-time access. So those might be reasons why in-app guides aren't commonly used in documentation. They do provide you with a dashboard with some rich analytics, And they often, to access the in-app guide, they often provide you a resource center. So the user has several things that they can access from the resource center. So I'm going to use Pendo as an example because I'm more familiar with Pendo. I've used it, and I just want to show you a little bit about what Pendo is like. So you have a dashboard. You've got lots of options on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go through what these options are, but you can look at, product statistics. You can look at statistics for your users. You can look at user behavior. You can have walkthrough guides. You can have NPS surveys. I'm sure most of you have seen NPS surveys before. This is where, a pop-up might appear saying, how likely are you to recommend this software to a friend? Now that's an NPS survey. So here on just the dashboard sort of overview page of Pendo, you've got visitor overview information. So these are individuals. You can see how many visitors have accessed this in-app guide today, daily, weekly, monthly, and you get a graphical representation of it as well. You can also look at account overview. So these are, say you have 100 customers, so 100 accounts. You might have 20 people from each company or each account accessing the in-app guide. And this information on the right-hand side of the screen is focused on the account. So you can see how many accounts access the in-app guide today, daily, weekly, and monthly, and also the visual representation of it. Now we're going to take a look at this little icon you see in the bottom right. This is the widget. And this is the icon that users would click in order to expose or reveal the resource center. So here's an example of Pendo's resource center. In this case, you can add anything in these sections. They've got, links, a link or section for the help center. So they can link out to different articles in the documentation portal. They've got a link to submit support tickets. They've got a section for product updates and a section for sharing your feedback. And another thing I want to point out is you see that number 15? Every time you add something new to this resource center, a number will pop up as to how many components you've added. And this number also shows on the little icon in the corner. So the user knows, hey, something new has been added, and it draws their attention to go take a look. So I'm just going to focus on this share your feedback for a moment. So even though this is focused on the product, think about how you could use something like this for documentation. So the one on the left is what you see when you click Pendo's share your feedback. There's a few questions there. You can answer the questions and submit your feedback. The example in the middle is just a different way to style. There's so much customization you can do with these in-app guides. In this case, they would have clicked into the similar section of, provide your feedback. You click the button, share your feedback, and a pop-up appears in the bottom right of the screen asking you some further questions. Okay, so you might think to yourself, great, I've got all these ways I can get proactively get user feedback, and I can, up my documentation, make it even better for the user. However, the proactive approach only gets you so far. It fails to capture the true behavior of the user. It captures what the user is telling you, but it doesn't capture what they're doing when they're in the documentation portal. And it's very user intensive. So the user has to take further action in order to give you that feedback. This method can also be quite biased because there are some people who just don't like to give feedback. They don't like to fill out little forms. They're busy. That doesn't mean that they don't have ideas or opinions or feedback for you. They just aren't the type to, click through and provide feedback. So in this way, you're only capturing a subset of users, say maybe like 20% of all your users. And you think to yourself, okay, well, how do I know about the rest of the users? 20% is great. These are some great ideas, great methods, but it's still limited. I'm only capturing that small subset. So we want to take it to the next level. So you want to go from boss baby to, let's say, boss baby businessman. And you can do this by, you can switch to a reactive approach. Now, the reactive approach is, it analyzes user actions. So this is where analytics come in. You're not asking the user to do anything more than what they're already doing. You let them do what they do on the website, and then you go in and look at the analytics, and you can follow their actions. Where are they landing? Why are they, perhaps what paths are they taking when they're in the documentation? And as we all know, actions speak louder than words. So in this case, you've got 100% of your population or your users covered. So there are two major forms of analytics that we can use. There's Google Analytics, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and there's MadCap Central Analytics. So I'm going to go into how you can use this in a complementary fashion to get the most out of both of these analytics systems. So Google Analytics. This is an example of the Google Analytics dashboard. Now, again, I'm not going to go into all the things you can do with Google Analytics because there's a host of things you can do. There's lots of information online. There's lots of courses you can take. But the thing about Google Analytics is that it's not easy and it's not that intuitive. You have to take the time and the effort to learn how to use it and use it well in order to get the most out of it. So on the dashboard here, you've got menu items on the left-hand side. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these menu items. I just want to give you the gist of what the Google Analytics dashboard looks like. Here you can see a summary of how many users are accessing the site, what's their bounce rate. You get a graphical representation of it. You can get information such as how do you acquire your users? Are they, is it direct link, through referral, through browsing, whatnot? You can look at where are your users around the world? And you can also look at when do your users visit, which time of day, and this may be affected by where they are in the world. If you look at the behavior tab on the left, again, I'm just going to show you the overview screen. It's very similar to the information we saw. Graphical representation of how many users are accessing the site. As you can see here on the end, this curve dips on June 19th and June 20th. Well, that was the weekend. So that's, expected behavior. You can, filter this for months at a time or daily stats or weekly stats, whatever you like. You can also look at information like unique page views, how long someone spends on one of your documentation pages. And you can also look at the pages that are being viewed. So it lets you know, which are the most commonly viewed. So although Google Analytics is extremely powerful, like I said earlier, it does take time and effort to learn how to use this. So this is where you can complement it with MadCap Central Analytics, which is very easy to use. You can set it up in a couple of clicks, and it doesn't require any courses or any extensive knowledge to be able to read the analytics and extrapolate from them. I'm going to go back to the questions that we asked ourselves at the beginning. How do I know the documentation portal is being used? Well, with MadCap Central Analytics, you can look at topic hits, and you can look at browser and operating system statistics. This information you can also see in Google Analytics. So here is what the MadCap Central Analytics tab looks like. So the Analytics tab is accessed on the left. That tab has several pages associated with it. We're going to look at topics here. I'm going to go through and explain this page in detail so that as you see subsequent pages in this presentation, you'll understand the structure and the layout. So in this case for topics, you've got, again, a nice graphical representation of the most viewed topics. You have the path, so basically this is where your topic sits within MadCap Flare. You've got the title of the topic, and you've got how many views of that topic. In the top, you have some icons. The first one is just a refresh icon. Maybe you've been sitting on here all day and you want to see by the end of the day, has anything changed? You just click refresh. The second button is a download button, which downloads a CSV file of all this data, which is an excellent way to keep track of the data. And it allows you a method to insert comments and just basically manipulate the data from the CSV file. The third icon is a filter icon, so you can filter by date. You can look at monthly statistics. You can look at, every 2 months, you can look at weekly statistics, whatever you like. The last button is a settings button, And this just allows you to configure which columns on this screen you want to display. So maybe you don't want to look at the title, you don't want to look at the path, you just want to look at one of those two and the view count. You can do that. The nice thing is that it doesn't affect what's in the CSV file. The CSV file is always going to show you all of these columns. So as you can see here, the first line is the home topic. So that's a landing page. So we're going to expect that that's going to be the most commonly viewed page. That's how people get into the portal. You would then take a look at everything that comes after this. As you can see here in the second line, we have this payment methods coverage page, and it's got a lot of hits. So this is telling me this is a really important page. I should take the time to focus on this page and make sure that it has all the information the users need, so that, you know, as it's telling you here that a lot of your users are accessing this page. And on this tab, we can look at browser statistics. So you can see here, you know, which browsers are users using to access your documentation portal. In this case, you can see that, you know, many of the users are using Chrome. Some are using Safari and some Firefox. Now, this may be important when you want to make certain decisions. So, for example, say you want to deprecate IE and Edge. You don't want to support it anymore. And you're asking yourself, well, how many of our users are actually using Edge or IE? So you would follow these statistics for however long, you know, a few months, to determine how many people are going to be affected by this change. And say you're seeing, you know, a sliver, month after month, you see a sliver of people accessing the documentation with Edge. You know, that may further provide further support for you wanting to deprecate support for this particular browser. You've also got an operating system statistics tab. This will tell you what kind of OS systems that users are using to access your documentation. So you can see here, Windows 10 is the most common, but you can see there's also some Linux users. You can see there's some Mac users as well. So now let's go back to our second question. How do I know users are finding the content that they need? So in MadCap Central Analytics, you're going to want to look at the search phrases and particularly the micro content. Now, this is something that Google Analytics cannot provide you in terms of micro content. And for those of you who maybe need a refresher on what micro content is, here's an example. The user types in a search term, let's say counterparty in this case, and this box appears at the top of the search. And the box could be instructions, it could be information about a feature, but the point is the information pops up right away. The user can quickly see it. It also provides a link to the topic that contains this information, so the user can click into the link and go and read more about it. And this just provides more focus, and it's actually a very useful way to enhance search in MadCap Flare. Because we always want to provide, you know, information not just at the right time, but we want to let them, you know, be able to access the information quickly and not have to go hunting around for this information. So here in MadCap Central, we look at the phrases tab, and this will tell you the search terms that users are typing in. So you can see here in the left-hand column, you know, API, payment file. You've got the number of searches. You've got the number of topics that are returned as a result of that search. And this column here, you've got the micro content results. So an X would mean that there is no micro content in your project to support that keyword. And a check mark would mean there is. So ideally, you would take this information, and your goal is to have no X's at all. So you want to ensure that you have micro content that is applicable to all of the keywords that your users are actually searching for. So this will appear right away at the top of the search page, and direct them specifically to a topic about it. They can click through and access it quickly. Let's go to the third question now. How do I know if we're missing useful content? So in this case, we want to look at phrases with no results. And this is also something that Google Analytics does not provide. And it's very useful from a documentarian perspective because, maybe like I said earlier, we've worked so hard on getting this documentation out. How do we know we're missing something? You know, you don't know unless somebody tells you, right? And instead of proactively asking this information, you can use this reactive approach to gather this kind of information. So in MadCap Central, we want to look at the phrases with no results tab. Now, if we look at the first line, we see that this word Carl, number of searches 16. Well, that's an adequate number of searches. We ask ourselves, you know, why aren't they finding Carl? There is information about Carl in the documentation, but this is telling you that when users type in CARL, they're not finding it. And in this case, Carl is actually C.A.R.L. And so we'd look at something like this and we'd say, you know what, we need to create a synonym for this Carl, so that when the user types it in with the periods or not, or they type it in as you see it here, they will still get the same information returned. And the same can be said for the second line, P and L. In this case, the standard is P/L, which just means profit and loss, not P and L. But you know, people adopt their own ways they want to spell things. So this again tells me we need to create a synonym for P and L. In the third example, it's just an outright spelling mistake. So this acronym is actually NAAP, not NAPP. But again, my response would be the same. Okay, we need to make a synonym for this so that, you know, it doesn't matter which way they type it in, the information is going to come up. The last example is kind of different than the first three that I covered. So in this particular case, HIM is an acronym for Hydrocarbon Inventory Management. And in this case, this content wasn't in the portal at this time. It was a new project that, you know, people knew information was going to be coming out about it. There had been some talk, you know, around the company about this new project, and people were going on the portal and looking for it, and it wasn't there yet. We just weren't ready to add it yet. We're still gathering information. So in this case, it would tell me, you know, HIM is something that people are looking for. They really want to know more about this project. And so we need to add this to the site. So as soon as you add it, it shouldn't come up in the phrases with no results. So this is a way you can get targeted information from the users as to, you know, what they really need, but you're not providing them in your documentation portal. So at this point, we're thinking, great, you know, we've got 100% of our users covered. We can, you know, analyze the heck out of things and draw all these conclusions and better our documentation and better the experience for the user. But if you want to take it to the next level, you should take the integrative approach. So this will help us move from Neophyte to Ninja. And this involves using both the proactive and reactive approach. So the proactive approach, say you chose feedback widgets, you know, you're getting, let's say 20% of your customers, great. You're getting verbal feedback, you're getting, you know, feedback that perhaps, you know, say you're using those text boxes, feedback that is not kind of siloed into these different categories. They're free to tell you whatever they want. And then you've got the reactive approach, where now you've covered 100% of your users and you're running analytics on this regularly. And I think that with the two approaches, you can really achieve the ultimate goal, which is, how can I better the documentation to cater to the user? How can I better their experience? How can I help them find things quickly and easily when they need it? So after you've figured out which approach you want to use, then you will want to consider some next steps. So you should set up some sort of a cadence as to when you're going to do these assessments, right? So in terms of feedback widgets, for example, you may want to do that assessment as it comes in. But things like the analytics part of it, you may want to set up, you know, some sort of cadence, monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually. Say you've just published a documentation site, just went live. Well, at that time, I would, you know, run these analytics monthly. I'd want to, you know frequently all of these sorts of passive feedback or actions that the users are doing, so that I can better the documentation. But say, 3 years down the road, you enter into sustainment. You're not updating the documentation very much, and you may want to switch then from a monthly cadence to a biannual or annual cadence. So overall, the combination of the three of them, you've got proactive, reactive, the integration of the two of them. Within reactive, you've got Google Analytics, you've got MadCap Central. All of this will bring you to the ninja level, where you can be an analytics guru and be able to just, madly focus on this updating of your documentation and catering to the user's needs. And with that, concludes my presentation. I will turn it back to Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much, Angela. This was really helpful. Just a couple things. We have, as a reminder, I know we have a couple questions that I want to get to, and if you can think of, feel free to use that question area in the GoToWebinar console if you have any questions about any of these implementations. We'd certainly be happy to talk about it. But just for a reminder, we will be having our conference, our Mad World User Conference, which is so much fun. We are going to be live, and we will be offering an online virtual option this year. There is a registration discount that expires today. So pop on up to our website if you want to take a look at that. We do have 2 ways to attend. Of course, we would love to see you in person. There's nothing like it, but we realize that's not for everybody. So we do have a virtual option this year too. And as another reminder, and please contact our sales team if you have any questions. We do have a promotion running through, I think it's right now. So if you have some opportunities to get licenses, this is a really good time to do it, because if you buy 3, you get 1 free, and that includes Central, AMS, and Flare. So please ask our sales team if you have any questions about that. They're happy to assist and answer questions about what's possible and what you can do. So just, as we just a couple questions for you, Angela, about the analytics. So with the Google Analytics, is, what flexibility does it offer? And also for MadCap Central, what if my content is gated and I don't necessarily have it out there in the real world for the Googles and the Bings to see? How does that impact my ability to get analytics with something like Central or even Google? I'm trying to combine a couple questions into one here. I think there's some concern about publicly facing content versus, gated, protected content. How can we utilize this, these analytics?
So whether your content is behind these, both forms of analytics are fine to use. MadCap Central, even if like I said, if your documentation is not up there on Google for everybody to find, you're still capturing the users of that documentation. So, for example, maybe the software UI has help buttons in it, right? Every page of the software UI might have a help button, and that help button takes you to the documentation. So you're certainly directing your users. You're certainly able to gather feedback from the applicable users and not just anybody that can land on the site.
Right. So as a follow-up, and as a follow-up question that came into that, so if I'm publishing my content to my own gated servers where people have to log in using some sort of, single sign-on or, authentication, if we're not using Central for hosting, can we still get that data, or do we have to host all that information in MadCap Central?
No, absolutely. You can get that information. You definitely don't need to publish through MadCap Central.
Right. Yeah. And to add to that too, just from the licensing standpoint, my 2 cents would be, as long as you have that Central account, you can set up those targets in Flare to start tracking it. So to kind of add to what you said, Angela, is you can be totally decoupled from Central if you want to. Your output can be published to gated servers. It could even be published to your end users' desktops. Maybe it's an application like MadCap Flare, which lives on a local machine, and the documentation ships with the application, and it's accessed locally using a web browser. If it's HTML5, doesn't matter where it is, right? You can start tracking that output anywhere.
And all those pages of analytics that I showed in MadCap Central, those are per destination. So if you had 3 different sites, for example, of documentation, those stats will appear per site.
Right. Yeah, in other words, if you wanted to segment out, if you're producing sites for product A, B, and C, for example, Maybe you've got different audiences hitting those different sites. You can segment those out if you choose to. So you can really focus in, well, how is audience A using their content? How is audience B using their content, et cetera, I think is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another question came in about the widgets that you mentioned. So where is, and maybe this is, I'm sort of half answering this, but maybe you can expand a little bit. Depending on the widget that you choose to use, oftentimes where's the best place to put that widget information? Because it seems like, depending on the widget you choose, we want it to show up in our output, like on every single topic. So if somebody could give that proactive feedback, where do you often see people utilizing those widgets in their Flare projects?
The bottom of the screen, bottom center, bottom right, or bottom left justified with the content.
Gotcha.
You can see it top right, top left, or bottom left.
Okay. And in terms of integrating it, do most people use the like the sort of the master page approach? Is that the best place to think about using some of those
Absolutely. If you're absolutely, whether you're customizing it yourself or using the purchased version, definitely the master pages. You can insert it in as many master pages as you have.
Right. Right. And in terms of a question came in about Pendo, the resource center, and I don't know if this is something that you've seen or used, but I'm looking at some questions that have sort of come in. I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone. Is that resource center that is something that can, if that's going to be invoked from the doc portal or the app, is that something that could look into published content where we could maybe point that resource center to a documentation site out of Flare? And it might index or find topics in a Flare HTML5 site. Not sure if you've ever tried that or if you've done that in practice.
I believe you can. So you can have your documentation directly within that resource center as well, or pieces of your documentation within the resource center. And you can add a search. So when they click on, say, section 1, right, is said help center in the Pendo example I gave. And the slide that shows up after you click that, it's got a search bar on the top, and you can search for the various topics that are in there.
Right. Another question came in terms of the speed with which we can start seeing the data flow in to either Google Analytics or Central. How quickly do you have to, is there an indexing time period to see that, or how quickly can we start seeing the data flow in if we've got one of those two set up, or maybe both of them?
As soon as a user lands on your site.
Okay, so it would be like the minute somebody hits it, no matter where the content is published.
Yeah, the minute somebody does a search, you're going to see that information.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm looking at the questions. I think we covered most of them that have come in. I was trying to kind of combine any together. I'm going to leave this open for a quick second if anybody has any last minute questions. I want to thank you, Angela, so much for taking the time to run through this. This was so helpful. If we can't get to anything that comes in the last few minutes, we'll follow up with you. But I do want to thank you for taking the time and run through some of these options. I hope you all found this useful in terms of combining really this best of breed approach into getting that proactive feedback that people can add, as well as that passive behind the scenes data that I think is so critical as we develop this continuous improvement process with our documentation. It really, and hopefully you agree, Angela, I think this is really one of those things where we want to use all the various tools available to us, and so it's a great example of how we can kind of blend these things together to get the data that we can act on quickly. So I hope you all found this helpful. I hope this gave you some ideas if you're not already incorporating that proactive and perhaps that passive feedback, some ideas of what you can do. And I will mention, just on the MadCap side, if you don't have MadCap Central yet, if something about that was interesting and you want to test it, please reach out to us directly at MadCap. I always encourage people to try this out. If you've got some existing HTML5 content and you just want to see how this works, the trial of Central is free. There's no obligation, and you can set it up within a minute or so, as Angela mentioned. And the MadCap team, we can certainly help you with that. There's no cost to it, but it might be interesting. If you're not already gathering some of that behind the scenes data, that's something that we can help with quickly. You can use a trial, you can let it run. Again, there's no pressure or obligation, but it helps to kind of see how quickly and easily we can set this up. perhaps in addition to some of the other data gathering things that you've got on the proactive side too. So if you don't already have a trial, if you're interested in it and you want to see how it works, you can certainly do the central trial on its own, a la carte, and that's something that the MadCap team can help you with. So I would be remiss not to mention that, because it's quite easy to get set up if you don't already have it, and we can kind of help you through that quickly. So
Yes, and
that's,
it's also
yeah.
quite easy to switch from the trial to the paid version.
Correct. Yeah. So at the end of that time, if it's something that you want to continue doing and continue gathering, we can help convert that. It's really all you, just to kind of go back to the question that person asked about, do we need to host content in Central? You don't. As long as you have a single that single Central account that you can log into and set up your targets, you can start using that as your window or your dashboard into the data to complement all of the other data sources that you're getting. So you don't have to bind your project there. You don't have to host it there. You don't have to use it for source control. You can use it simply for the data gathering. And as you saw, all that great information that you can gather can really sort of, the price for the Central subscription, which is, just the single author seat, which is all you need to set up your output analytics and your targets. It's $109 a month right now. So it's really affordable, and the data that you're able to get and act on will pay for itself quite quickly. So if you're ever interested, if you don't have it yet, we can always help you get set up, something that you want to test. All right, so my commercial's done there. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for joining. I hope you found this helpful. Please reach out to us if you have any questions at all. And we do hope to see you on another presentation. And thanks again, Angela, for your time. Much appreciated. It was really, really helpful. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the week. And if you are in the US, happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day. And we'll talk to you on another presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, everyone.